Greetings, everyone. Good time of the day since we are all over the world. And today is our concluding day of the conference on time perspectives. And it is a great pleasure to introduce you to this following keynote presenter. And this is going to be Audrius Beinorius, who is a Lithuanian philosopher and Orientalist who specializes in Indology and Buddhist studies and various comparative studies, and also is a translator. And Audrius has written more than 90 scientific papers in English, Lithuanian, Polish, and Russian, and has published 4 monographs and made translations from Sanskrit, Pali, Russian, English, French, and German. And the main scientific fields of Professor Audrius Beinorius are perception of Indian culture in the West, Indian philosophy, Indian religious history, Buddhism and Hinduism, Indian astrology and cosmology, also cultural psychology and post-colonial studies, and methodologies of comparative religion studies, classical Indian psychology, Western esoteric movements in India, Theosophy and Freemasonry. He is also a founder and former director of Confucius Institute at Vilnius University, and was the director of the Center of Oriental Studies at Vilnius University, editor-in-chief of the academic journal Acta Orientalia Vilnesia, professor of Asian religions at Tartu University, Estonia. And today we will hear this very exciting talk, KΑLA, Classical Indian Philosophy on Perception of Time. And we encourage you to post your questions and comments in the chat and also on Slido. So it's sli.do with the hashtag ICTP 2021, so you can enter the room and ask your questions and post your comments. And so looking forward to this exciting talk. And Professor Audrius, microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. Do you hear me well, I hope? So at first, I would like to say that it is a great honor for me to be invited to this conference as a keynote speaker. I'm no specialist of a topic of time. However, presently dealing with a particular research project on destiny and divination, I came very much close to this issue, perception of time in India. So let's start. I will try to share my screen now. Yes. So the Indian tradition offers a wide spectrum of well-formulated views about time, Kala. Brahmanical, Buddhist, Jaina schools all endeavor to understand the multifaceted nature of time in its metaphysical, logical, and epistemological aspects, and for long debated with each other over such issues. Since Vedic times, calculation of time units and assessment of the qualities of time have been very important for ritual performances. However, time in abstracto, as an abstract philosophical category, is not mentioned in the oldest text Rig Veda and the earliest ritual text of Vedic literature. The word Kala that has, the word Kala that is the most common term for denoting the abstract notion of time in the later tradition is used in the Rig Veda only once. In that passage, a dice player is mentioned who throws the dice on time, Kale. That is in appropriate moment when it is his turn to play. Although the Rig Veda has no unifying term for time as a general notion, it seems that all major Indian ideas and concepts of time developed in the later tradition originate there. First and foremost, it is the idea of two types of time, or two times. The first is time eternity, and the second one is transitory, concrete, or profane time. Time first appears in Adharva Veda as supreme power, akin to destiny, and Kala is later identified with Yama, the god and judge of the death, and as associate of Mrityu, or death. In the Brahmanas' time, around 9th-7th centuries BC, time epitomized by the year had to be conquered or obtained through ritual action in order to reach immortality. In the oldest Upanishads around the 7th century BC, there are many passages in which Kala is used in the older sense of point of time, right time, or period of time. Svetashvatara Upanishad mentions Kala as one of the possible causes of the world and describes time as a compound consisting of three modes: past, present, and future. Type units and their regular periodic sequence, krama, paryaya, are constitutive elements of the cosmic and ritual order as they manifest certain file-sustaining rhythms, such as seasons or solstices. Time units, being not only quantities, but primarily qualities, indicate opportunities for strengthening and confirming a relationship among the different realms and inhabitants of cosmos between living and death. In his linguistic analysis in Vakyapadiyam, famous Indian grammarian of 5th century Bhartrihari calls this power of time Kala Shakti and power of freedom Svatantriya Shakti. Time is also endowed with creative power. Bhartrihari states that time is called Kala because brings forth Kalayati, objects out of their causes, and is responsible for the birth, continuity, and destruction of everything in cosmos. However, the primary etymological root of the term Kala is kal, which means to count, similar to Latin calculo, and also signifies to devour, which leads again to the ascription of destructive power to time. By the time of the great epic Mahabharata, compiled between 3rd century BC and 3rd century AD, the doctrine of cyclical time as the supreme principle, the so-called Kalavada, was formulated. Time was viewed as oppressive, overpowering force that relentlessly pushes all beings towards their eventual death. If one truly understands and accepts the fact that time revolves, and therefore everything in the world is transitory, then one will no longer be a victim of the pain that this dimension of life brings. One will no longer be terrorized by time. In the last centuries BC, the structure of time was increasingly codified. If the overpowering force of time could not be avoided, it could at least be understood, codified, and made predictable. The structure of time had to be deciphered, and this had to go beyond the basic time units defined in ancient Indian texts on astronomy, astrology, and timekeeping, such as Nimesha, an eye wink, the Muhurta, 1/3 of day, the fortnight, the month, and the year. In such a way, time and destiny had to be interpreted and made predictable. That became a principal task of all influential astrological and divinational practices. Notions of time and destiny became closely interrelated and important factors in the interpretation of favorable and unfavorable circumstances for all kinds of activities. But historical time required a concrete measurable expression, so larger cycles were needed. The Yuga theory provided a way to give shape to historical time, to objectify it. The term Yuga refers to a mythical historical system of 4 ages, beginning with Golden Age and ending with the Dark Age, Kali Yuga, we're living presently. At the conclusion of this 4 Yuga cycle, that is, at the end of Kali Yuga, the world is destroyed and then recreated, and the whole cycle begins anew. The perception of time as cyclical process has found expression at the microcosmic level through the theory of reincarnation. It is the reason, at least, to some extent, why cyclical time acquired such importance during this time of transition and later became an integral part of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Time destroys everything, but it is also eventually restoring everything for someone who lives in the social realm in historical time. Liberation implies breaking free from the grip of time in order to attain a state which is beyond time and therefore beyond death. In the epic tradition, there is strong emphasis on the connection between time and death. The image of all-swallowing Kala, the god of time, forever turning in circles, is also very frequently used in Sanskrit literature in the sense of impersonal and blind destiny or fate. And for no doubt impersonal in origin, it too is commonly personalized or appears as the instrument for expressing the will of the great god. Time in the Hindu religious tradition does not just measure, but predetermines the events which it brings to pass. As there is a famous sentence in Mahabharata, life and death, happiness and unhappiness, all is rooted in time. Time ripens beings, time destroys creatures. Time again brings to an end the time that burns down creatures. Time develops all beings in the world, pure and impure. Time destroys all creatures and again sends them forth. Unchecked, impartial, time moves amongst all beings. In famous Bhagavad Gita, Krishna manifests himself to the Prince Arjuna in marvelous cosmic form as a violent protector of the cosmic order and explains this fearsome appearance as follows. Deadly time I am, ready to bring about the end of the world, coming forward to absorb the worlds here. So time here is regarded as a cosmic force defined not only in terms of quantity, it means units of time, but also of quality, auspicious or inauspicious, ripe or unripe. It is within the context of death, destruction, and catastrophe that the effects of fate and time are the most readily seen at work. Let's shift now to philosophical schools. Each of the well-formulated systems of different Orthodox Brahmanic and heterodox Shramanic schools of Indian philosophy has its distinct theory of time in support of and in accordance with its specific metaphysical structure. The theme of time in Indian philosophy is intimately related to such basic concepts as being and becoming, change and causality, creation and annihilation. Certainly, having a very limited time, I've been not able to present a perspectives of time of each school, just will emphasize some most significant aspects of philosophical debates among Indian schools. A study of problem of time in Indian philosophy is of special interest in connection with the logical Nyaya and atomist Vaisheshika schools of thought. It is there that one comes across a bold, realistic view of time. These schools, advocating a pluralistic metaphysic, focus on the reality of absolute time, Mahakala, as vital to their entire conceptual framework. Time is all-pervasive, is an eternal category of existence. That is to say, it is without beginning and without end. It is composite, uncomposite, having no parts. It is independent, real, and unchanging. Controversies between the Nyaya and the Buddhist philosophers constitute a prolonged chapter of Indian philosophy. The adherents of the respective schools carried on dispute through the centuries, covering a whole range of problems of fundamental importance. The Buddhists renounced all conceptions of being as permanent, as immutable, as substance, and universal. They also rejected all ideas about time as unitary, as all-embracing receptacle, and as a real per se. They maintained, on the contrary, the idea of reality as flux, involving a conception of time, samaya, as instant, and that of being as instantaneous. It is the key to the Buddhist conceptual structure. How Buddhists established the momentariness of the real, stating that it cannot be established by perception, the Buddhist proves it by the inference. The Buddhists offered a chain of arguments and analysis with the view of establishing their principal thesis that the real is momentary. They recognize only succession, santati, and the present. Buddhists recognize succession alone as the only constituent of time and identify the perception of time with the perception of succession. The Buddhist doctrine of universal momentariness, Kshanikavada, postulated by Buddha himself, identified time with succession and succession with changes. The Buddhist idea of universal instantaneousness leaves no room for any abating mental substance in the flux of consciousness, the stream of sensation, perception, volition, etc. What is important that the conscious moments, however, follow one another, not accidentally, but according to the law of dependent origination, so-called pratitya samutpada. It means they are causally interchained. Something one happening, another happens also. The specific mode in which the early Buddhist Vaibhashika school formulated the idea of momentariness explains why the term Sarvastivada was especially coined to designate their doctrine. They propounded that all elements exist in all three times, past, present, and future. This position has come down in 4 versions with slight variations. In the Abhidharma Kosha of Vasubandhu, written in 4th, 5th centuries, a good exposition of this stand is given. Moreover, both in the Madhyamika Karika of Nagarjuna, 3rd, 4th century, and in Tattva Samgraha of Santa Rikshita, 8th century, this view is refuted as non-Buddhist. The first question that arises in connection with temporal perception is whether time is an object of perception or not. According to Vedantists, time is a coactive of all perception. The Mimamsakas of Kumarila Bhatta school, 7th century, acknowledge that time as such is never an object of perception, but it is perceived always as a qualification of sensible objects and never independently. Nayayikas too hold that time is perceived both by external and internal sense organs. Internal means mind, as a qualification of their objects of perception. Jayanta Bhatta, an influential representative of the logical Nyaya school, in his Nyaya Manjari, has discussed the possibility of the visual perception of time. According to Vaisheshika, an object of visual perception must have extensity and noticeable magnitude and manifest the sensible color. But time is colorless. How then can it be an object of visual perception? The Nyayika responds, how is color perceived even it is a colorless? Certainly, an object has color, rupa, which inheres in it, but color itself has no color inhering in it. And if color can be perceived, though it is colorless, then time also can be an object of visual perception, even if it is colorless. Thereby, time is not only an object of visual perception, but of all kinds of perception. Udayanacharya of 10th century states, he provides a significant analysis of the idea of momentariness of the real only to demonstrate the untenability of the Buddhist doctrine. One of the various objections that he raises is that no perception is possible on the Buddhist premises. Perception presupposes a contact between the visual organ and the entity, any entity, a possibility which outrooted by the proposition that which exists is momentary. This amounts to saying that perception cannot be used as a valid means for establishing the momentariness of the real. The so-called perceived time as a qualifying element is of course a case of extraordinary perception, so-called yogi pratyaksha. But in all cases, it is only inference that can establish the unitary all-pervading time. The ontological reality of time is an idea which the Nyaya and Vaisheshika schools vehemently insist on, as opposed to the idea of time as merely a subjective construction. Again, these two schools insist that time is inherently unitary, eka, and indivisible, avibhajya. The Nyaya Vaisheshika philosophers maintain that time is inferred as the basis of such notions as priority, posteriority, simultaneity, succession, quicknesses, and slownesses. But though time is an object of perception, it is never perceived as an independent entity. One of the essential characteristics of time is succession, and succession is never perceived apart from change. So we can never perceive time apart from actions or changes which occur in time. But from this, it does not follow that there is no perception of time at all, for an element of time always enters into the perception of actions as a constituent factor. Actions are never perceived without being qualified by time. Actions unqualified by time or timeless actions are never perceived. Here, the conclusion of Nyayika school: time cannot be perceived as independent entity, but only as qualifying adjunct of events or actions. There is no perception of empty time devoid of all sensible content, but only of filled time or time filled with some sensible matter. When we perceive succession or simultaneity, sooner or later we do not perceive more actions, but we perceive something else which qualifies these actions, and that is time. Perception of the present. In the Nyaya Sutra, an unidentified opponent raises an objection in which the validity of the three-time determinations is questioned. And in commentary thereon, the opponent's objection is summarized as follows. It is held that there cannot be any present time, as one could discern with reference to motion and space, only a past and future time determination. The example given in support of this claim is that of fruit loosening from its stalk, falling towards the ground. The space traversed through which it is fallen is associated with time past, and the space which is yet to be traversed before it reaches the ground with the time future. There is no conceivable in between these two which could obtain a time determination called time present, Vartamana Kala. Therefore, the Nyayas claim that inference can furnish knowledge of entities of all three times cannot be accepted. However, to this objection, the Nyayika points out in reply that if there were no present time, there cannot be past or future time either. The time denominations of past and future are entirely dependent on time present. The objection is based on a false appraisal of time by confounding it with space. Vatsyayana, famous scholar of Nyaya, in his Nyaya Bhasha, pointedly brings out that spatial divisions are not the basis for three time distinctions. The different parts of space are coexistent and remain unaffected by the motion. There, in this case, of falling fruit, before and after its commencement, and cannot therefore be taken as indicating time. It is action which reveals it. The three time distinctions are to be understood with reference to action. So, the past and future actions of an entity are absent, and they can be discerned only as relative to the action which is present. Action is then the basis for conventional time divisions. It is clear from this analysis that so-called temporal divisions do not pertain to the time per se, but it is only with reference to action that these can be meaningfully understood. So thus, the time present is to be accepted. The consciousness of the present is the nucleus of the consciousness of the past and the future. The past and the future are built upon the present. Hence, the perception of the present cannot be denied, as all our time consciousness is centered in it. So now the Buddhist view in some few words. The Buddhists do not recognize the existence of duration or blocks of time. They identify time with mere succession of ideas or thoughts, or sometimes intentions even. The Buddhists hold that there is no abstract time apart from presentations. Time is not a substantive reality, as the Nyayikas hold, but it is a cluster of successive presentations. An abstract time apart from momentary impressions is an artificial conceptual construction. According to Buddhists, there are no continuous and uniform impressions, but only a series of detached and discrete impressions, a perpetual flux of successive mental presentations. Continuity is only an illusory appearance due to our slurring over the landmarks of impressions owing to their similarity. Momentary sensations alone are real. There are no continuity among discrete sensations. The seeming continuity of impressions is nothing more than the rapid succession of impressions owing to the rapidity and uniformity of stimulations. So according to the Buddhists, the sensible present has no duration. It is an instant or a time point, so-called kshana ekagrahya. For Buddhists, perception is nothing but a presentation. And a presentation is the presentation of a single moment. It cannot apprehend the past and the future. The past enters into the present at the time of passing away, and the future also enters into the present, though it is not yet come. So that the present presentation is an echo of the immediate past and a foretaste of immediate future. So Buddhists introduced an element of linking or transition between the past and the present, and between the present and the future, to explain our perception of the continuity of time. The Buddhists state also that time cannot be composite whole made up of parts. It cannot be a cluster of simultaneous presentations because there is no simultaneity among presentations. There is no uniform impression. Every impression is momentary. There cannot be a continuous impression. When there is a rapid succession of momentary impressions, they appear to be continuous, though they are not really so. And not only consciousness is momentary, but also consciousness or awareness of the momentariness of consciousness also is momentary. In this way, according to the Buddhists, all presentations are momentary, and as such, they can apprehend only the present, which has no length of duration, but is constituted by the single moment. The sensible present, therefore, is instantaneous or momentary. Nayayikas and Vedantists, to other schools of Indian philosophy, clearly recognize the importance of duration, apart from which succession has no meaning. The Nayayika urges that even a momentary glance, nimesha drishti, can apprehend the continued existence of an object. Why should then perception be regarded as apprehending the instantaneous present? Even supposing that a momentary glance cannot apprehend the past and the future, but only the present, what is the span of the present time perceived by a continuous and uniform impression? Animation drishti. It is a time point or a tract of time. It is instant or a length of duration. According to Jadunath Singh, the sensible present continues as long as continuous and uniform impression persists without an oscillation of attention, and as long as it is not interrupted by another impression, so that this single unitary presentation apprehends not an instantaneous present, but a lengthened or extended present with a certain duration. The Buddhist may urge that such an extended present is a tract of time made up of a number of moments. But the present is rarely a single moment. The immediately preceding moment is past, and the immediately succeeding moment is future. So they cannot be perceived. The Nayayika replies that in determining the span of sensible present, we must not assume at the outset that it is momentary, but we must determine it by an appeal to experience. According to Vedantists, too, a continuous and uniform impression is a single unitary cognition with a certain duration. It is not a series of momentary impressions in rapid succession, as Buddhists hold. In the continuous impression of jar, the mental mode, which assumes the form of the jar, is one and undivided as long as the jar is presented to the consciousness without any flickering of attention, and is not interrupted by another act of cognition. So actually mind becomes kind of object we are trying to cognize. It is not made up of many momentary cognitions because, according to Vedantists, a cognition continues in the field of consciousness as long as the mind does not assume the form of a different object. Finally, I have to mention briefly another school, Indian school, so-called Jainas. The Jaina school propound a unique atomic conception of time. In Jaina philosophy, we have a concept of substances made of atoms. Substance, dravya, is real, permanent on account of its essence, originating in design in respect of its modes. Substances are classified into extended, having a body, and non-extended, and that is a time. Time is indivisible entity made of specific time atoms. There is a term, kala anu, beginningless, omnipresent, and devoid of extension. They are distinguished from space atoms by the fact that, unlike the latter, they are not capable of combining. Time is what makes possible the continuity, modification, newness, and oldness of extended substances. Besides, time is branched into empirical and conventional. Conventional is divided into units and also absolute or ultimate time, characterized by continuity. The conventional time periods of which we find a long list in Jaina sources, range from minutest moment called Samaya to concept of a year, Samvatsara. In the Jaina text, the absolute time is described not only as a real existence, but also as being potent. It brings about changes in other substances. It is significant that Jainism, with its realistic framework of thinking, accepts the reality of change, which in turn points to the reality of time. In fact, only the philosophical school of monistic Vedanta held time, together with the rest of the empirical order, to be ultimately unreal, illusory, Maya. Most Indian philosophers denied that time was unreal. To use the Advaita metaphor, the veil of Maya covers the non-dual absolute, Brahman, and projects the world of multiplicity, movement, and time. For patriarch of Advaita tradition, Shankaracharya, who lived in 8th century, time is the essence of the phenomenal world. And since the phenomenal world has no independent being, time too is not an independent reality. The Vaisheshikas and the Jains both accept the reality of change along with the reality of time. Their notions of time, however, have important differences. To the Jainas, the absolute time consists of the ultimate time atoms, which are evidently conceived in plural terms, and the conventional time periods, short or long, are due to the measurements made on the basis of such extraneous factors as the motion of the heavenly bodies. The Vaisheshikas maintain that absolute time is one and indivisible. The conventional time usages can be many, made on the basis of such units of change, for instance, on the solar motion, etc. The Jainas find it untenable and raise a philosophical challenge to this notion of one omnipresent time. So, and finally, some of my conclusions. So, notions of time, destiny, and death are closely interrelated in religious Indian thinking. The structure of time in India was codified and made predictable, and that was a duty of especially people working in divinational practices. There is a wide range and colorful variety of Indian philosophical views about time where no single perspective is predominant. So we cannot make a kind of generalization that that is particular Indian view or perspective, keeping in mind all these different approaches. Among the principal issues of debates were the questions: is perception of present possible? Is sensible presentation instantaneous or it has duration? Is time objective and real or just subjective construction? Each analysis of time perception is based on a particular metaphysical and ontological foundations of those schools. And the prevailing interpretation is not psychological, but mostly epistemological, dealing with the crucial issues of validity of cognition and reliable knowledge. So thank you for your attention. You can see my contacts on the screen, and I'm looking now forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for this beautiful presentation. And we actually have quite a few questions. There is also, of course, a comment that it looks like it's very hot in Lithuania at the moment, and it is.
Lithuania is becoming tropical. It was a Nordic country, but now it's a tropical country.
Yes. And so the first question is how you became interested in Indian culture?
Usually being asked this kind of question, I have a very simple answer, a kind of joke. It is from my previous life. Impressions of my previous life. I have no other answer yet, sorry.
Yes, and then there was another comment saying that time destroying everything sounds like Kronos in Greek mythology. Maybe there is a link between these two cultures.
Yeah, it is excellent remark and very good point made. Of course, the link in general between Indo-European culture in Indian and ancient Greeks is evident because these both cultures belong to so-called Indo-European worldview in general. But there are many similarities between Kronos in that destructive aspect and Kala, or even Mahakala. I have no time to provide more iconographic material, not so much left of Indian case, but even in contemporary Buddhism, in the same Tibet or Tantric Buddhist countries, we have images, very popular images of Mahakala, terrible, destroying deity that destroys our illusions of permanent life. So there is connection, of course.
Thank you. And when you were talking about the notion of time in the Buddhist culture, or understanding of it, a question came in. Maybe you could elaborate to what everyday practices lead such unique understanding of time, if any.
Yes. It's a pity I had no time to present more elaborated perception and understanding of a variety of approaches and discussions, debates regarding, for instance, the concept of present, kshana, the concept of past, future, and present. So three-time perception. So keeping in mind the long Buddhist history, 2,500 years, and multiple different approaches and different schools, of course, we cannot talk about single Buddhist approach and single Buddhist perspective. So, but still, what is based on a doctrine of Kshanikavada, momentariness, is a fundamental for all Buddhist schools. As for practical application, certainly it is evident. And maybe you know that even so popular nowadays in the West, in Europe, in the United States, I guess also, Vipassana practices, mindfulness practices are based on this, how to say, philosophical conception of present moment. Be aware right and now of present moment. And duration is not existing there. There is only constant fixation of changing present moments. So I can say in briefly that yes, it is essential part, the doctrine of momentariness, Kshanikavada, is essential part of all Buddhist meditative techniques.
Yes. Thank you. And then next question is from Reen Sema, and she is wondering, how would ancient Indian philosophy see our current lifetime living in the internet and Zoom, where time and place is more relative and irrelevant?
Oh, it's very much anthropological approach provided with this question. It's not exactly my field. But what I wanted to say that, you know, again, I can repeat what I said just before, that there is no such unity. There is not such single Buddhist approach, Buddhist perspective. In every Buddhist country in Asia, there are different perspectives, starting from elitarian, ending with so-called folk perspective, folk understanding. And in general, what we have on elitarian level or scholastic Buddhist level, it's different from what people are thinking and what people are practicing, how people are perceiving even the Buddha himself as a semi-divine being in many countries also. But as for present time, you know, I can say just providing an example. There are two ways to observe TV or internet screen. One way to watch TV from Buddhist perspective, of course, is just to become immersed in what is going there. Let's say a movie, drama, emotions, feelings, sensations, and so on. So I'm losing my own self-awareness because I immersed in particular emotions. Another way, and many Buddhists would say that it is a Buddhist way to watch TV. I don't know how many Buddhists are doing this practically. It is to observe not what is going on the screen, but what is going on in my mind, my psyche, inside of me in general. I wanted to say soul, but just keeping in mind that there is no soul concept in Buddhism. So what is important, what kind of activity watching TV evokes in you. So it means that you are watching not external world, but just by watching externity, you are observing the processes inside of yourself. So in that sense, if you apply such perspective, nothing wrong with internet, nothing wrong with TV, with cinema, and so on. Everything depends on how you manage to deal with it.
Thank you. That's a really beautiful image with this, I think. And we have a few more comments. And there is a comment from Suresh Babu, who's saying that time as an experience is different depending on the states of mind, citta or chitta, in meditative context.
Sorry.
It was more like a comment, as I understand.
Yeah. But still,
so that the time as an experience is different depending on the states of mind.
Yes, of course, certainly. Yes, I agree. I agree because I have no time to talk about, let's say, another school, yoga and Sankhya schools in India, Orthodox darshanas or philosophical traditions, because yoga is another school which mentions in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, there is a term kshana, moment. And I do not remember even having translated Yoga Sutra into Lithuanian, but now I do not remember that particular place. But still, there is a sentence that by concentrating on kshana, on a particular present moment, not past and future, on present, you can achieve something. I don't remember exactly what. So what I wanted to say that yes, quality of your mind, and according to yoga tradition, there are different colors of mind, different qualities of mind, kshipta, vikshipta, mudha, stupid mind, distort mind, or peaceful mind. Depending on the general quality of your mind, your way of meditation, way of meditating, and your way of perceiving the world will be colored. I mean, will be different. So in that sense, yes, the comment is very much exact.
Yes, thank you. And we have a question from Philip Zimbardo. Which religions propose a new life after bodily death, and how do they differ from religions which propose no afterlife?
Oh my goodness. This question by the Philip is so broad. It's actually it requires a cross-cultural comparative religious studies institute that has to deal with this. But I have a contra question. Can you tell me any religion that would not have a perception of afterlife? Doesn't matter in what particular form. I would say that in spite of multiplicity of all kind of definitions of what is religion, what is not religion, how for religion is important concept of God, I would say that mostly the continuity of afterlife is probably unifying all religious worldviews. So all religions are talking about afterlife as an unavoidable condition, but differences of perception are evident. I can briefly mention the Buddhist tradition. Why? Because with some generalization, we can say that from Buddhist point of view, we are dying each moment. Each moment we are new. New in sense of our perception, in sense of our attitudes, in sense of our interests, motivations, and so on. Actually, in that sense, there is a not different, of course, there is difference, but not so great comparing our mental death at each kshana, at each moment, and the bigger gap, I mean, death, when we're losing our awareness. And in that sense, if we can become more aware of the process of constant succession of momentary conditions of our mind and perceptions now, right and now, then we can become probably, I hope, more aware of what may happen with us during the big dying, I mean, the death. So I can answer on in this way because, as I said before, I do not know religions that would deny afterlife or continuity. Again, we're talking about concept of time, continuation of, well, let's call perception.
Thank you very much. I think we covered all of the questions and comments, and this has been a very inspiring talk, and also for me an interesting concept of is the time colorless. I think I will think a little bit more about that one and a few other things.
You can rely also on Indian sources for your thinking.
I will do that. I would really hope that you could also share with us your slides, and we could also share it with the community as well, because I think it's very valuable. You covered so many different sources. It will be very interesting for us to look at those more precisely. Thank you so much once again. It's been a real pleasure, and we hope to see you more often.
So thank you very much. And really, I'm becoming now a fan of this time perspective conferences and looking forward for next one to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.